story sleuths, check this out. I was looking through some old Reed agency case files and I noticed something interesting. The same stories popped up again and again. The details are different, but glass slippers, mermaids, big bad animals eating little children, they're different versions of the same story. So what's going on here? I'm Detective Abby, and this is Crash Course Kids Literature. Today, we're talking about comparing, which means looking for similarities, and contrasting, which means looking for differences. And we're going to do that using fairy tales, different versions of them from all over the world. You already know all about fairy tales. We hear, read, and watch stories like Cinderella, Jack and the Beanstalk, and The Three Little Pigs all the time. And that's because fairy tales are really common, really old stories. They're a kind of folktale, which means they're stories that people have told over and over for a really long time. And they usually have some kind of important moral or lesson for us to learn. But the cool thing about folktales and fairy tales is that there are lots of ways to tell them, and they're told in different ways by different cultures. Here are the case notes on one you've probably heard many times before. Once upon a time, a girl was walking to bring her sick grandmother some cake. Along the way, she met a wolf. A short story, even shorter, the wolf ate the grandmother, the wolf posed as the grandmother, and the wolf then ate the little girl. My, what big eyes you have. Then a hunter came along, cut open the wolf's stomach, and rescued the girl and her grandmother. Good thing he showed up when he did, guys, because it was getting a little dicey in there. That story, as you've probably figured out, is called Little Red Riding Hood. And there are lots of different ways to tell it. Like, one of the oldest versions of Little Red Riding Hood is called The Wolf and the Kids. It's actually about a wolf that eats young goats. Turns out baby goats are called kids too. Who knew? Crazy. Don't worry, you're safe here. Then, around 300 years ago, someone in France wrote down a version of the story that ends when the wolf eats Little Red Riding Hood. No happy ending there. Well, except for the wolf. Later, some fairy tale writers in Germany, known as the Brothers Grimm, wrote a new version with a happier ending. That's the one where the hunter saves Little Red and her grandmother. But that's not the only Little Red Riding Hood story out there. There are Chinese, South African, Singaporean, and Taiwanese versions of Little Red Riding Hood too. When we compare the things they have in common, we can tell they're all the same basic story. But we can also contrast their differences to notice unique ways different cultures tell the story. For example, in a Chinese version, a peasant tells his daughter to bring juju fruits to her grandmother instead of cake, and they're stopped by a tiger disguised as an old woman instead of a wolf. Contrasting elements often teaches us something about the culture telling the story. Like, the juju fruit may be more common in Chinese culture than cake. Let's look at one more. In a South African version, a girl named Selana has to stay at home alone while her mother goes to work. Her mother tells her not to open the door for anyone, but a giant changes his voice to sound like her mother, and Selana opens the door. Then the giant grabs her and puts her in his bag. So how does this compare and contrast with our other story versions? Well, it depends on how zoomed in or zoomed out you are. Like, we can compare and say that all three of these stories have a scary creature for a villain, a wolf, a tiger, and a giant. That's a similarity. But if we zoom in, we can contrast the villains and say that two are animals and one is a mythical creature. That's two similarities and one difference. But then we can zoom in even further and notice that the two animal villains are different from each other. That's one more difference. The similarities among these three stories show us their meaning. In each story, a child is tricked by a stranger pretending to be a family member. The stranger turns out to be dangerous, and the child is rescued while the stranger is punished. This tells us that people all over the world think this story has an important lesson. Be careful who you trust, because people aren't always what they seem. The differences make this universal lesson relate to people from different backgrounds. And get this, you can even compare and contrast stories that seem very different. Like, what about Little Red Riding Hood and Charlotte's Web? Well, we can contrast them and point out that Charlotte's Web is a novel and Little Red is a fairy tale. But we can also compare them and notice they both have talking animals. This lets us make more and more connections between all the different things we read. Every person, culture, and country is different, and everyone tells stories differently. but the connections between those stories shows us what matters to all of us. And that, my friends, is my last case for the Read Agency. Thanks for all your help, story sleuths. Now, I can finally reveal the secret meaning of READ. Reading, eating, and dancing. Hit it! Thanks for watching this episode of Crash Course Kids Literature, which was filmed at the Complexly Studio in Indianapolis, Indiana, and was made with the help of all of these fantastic people.